Our last type of question that you're going to find on the SAT is what we called an implied question or an inferential question. Now, an inferential question is what I like to refer to as a thinking question. And that means that you're not going to find the answer directly in the passage, because there's not going to be a specific sentence that gives you the answer to an inferential question. The reason is that an inferential question asks you things like, what is the tone of this passage? Or what is the author's primary purpose for using this? Or what is the passage's main idea? You're never going to go into a passage and find a sentence that specifically says, the tone of this passage is blah, or the main idea of this paragraph is X. They're not doing that. That's where you have to start thinking. And this is why it's important to skim through that whole passage so that you can answer inferential questions. So when you get to an inferential, it's not necessary to go back to a specific line in the passage. It's more important to think about the passage as a whole and answer that question after you give it a little bit of thought. So now we're going to work on a little thing with timing, because I know that most students have a lot of trouble timing themselves when they're going through the critical reading section. So for starters, all critical reading sections start with your sentence completions. So there's not that many sentence completions questions, and you should be spending less than a minute on those in order to give yourself sufficient time to complete the passages. So for starters, make sure that you're doing your sentence completions in a timely fashion, and if you find yourself spending more than a minute on a question, you just gotta move on and omit it. Then, in terms of the actual timing for the passage, one thing that you have to do is realize what kind of reader are you. If you are super slow at reading and at answering the questions, you might be the type of candidate who doesn't want to necessarily read the whole passage first. And if timing is an issue for you, you're going to do a technique that's called chunking. I know it sounds a little weird, but chunking, what that means is you're going to batch together all of the different questions that have line references near each other. So when you get to a passage, the first thing you're going to do is read the italicized. That's always number one, no matter if you're a fast reader or a slow reader or a super slow reader. Number one. They should say italicized. If you're a relatively fast reader, then you should do the skimming technique. And you're going to read through the passage by skimming for triggers, and then you're going to go and answer the questions. And that should be totally fine for you if you're an average speed reader. But if you're a slow reader and you have major timing issues on this section, once you read the italicized section, you're not going to go to the passage. You're going to go to the questions, and you're going to do the chunking method. And what that means is that you're going to look at the line references of the specific questions that are similar. So if you see that question number 1 is asking a main idea question about the whole passage, you as a timing issue person are going to skip it. So you're going to skip any inferential questions. And at the end, if you have sufficient information, then you can answer them. But if you have timing issues, those are going to be saved for last. So first thing, you're going to skip any of the inferentials. Then if you get to a bunch of the next questions, like question 2, 3, and 4, that are asking about lines 4, 8, and maybe 16. And then you see that the next question is jumping all the way up to line 32 to 36. What you're going to do is you're going to read lines 1 through maybe 17, the line right after this last questions line, and read that paragraph or two. Then you're going to go back to the questions, answer the questions relating to work that's found in that paragraph or two. And then you're going to move on to your second chunk. So you're going to read chunks of the passage together, answer all of the questions pertaining to that chunk, and then move on to your next chunk. And what that does is it allows you to answer as many questions as you can in the little time that you have, since you're the type of person who's a slow reader. And it's not a big issue if you're a slow reader. There's plenty of brilliant readers out there who just happen to take a little more time. But what you don't want to happen is you don't want to spend all of this time reading an entire passage and then only have time to answer the first two questions that might pertain to that first paragraph. Because reading that whole second half, or that whole 2/3 of the latter portion of that passage, was just a waste of time for you because you didn't even get up to those questions. So you want to batch things together and maximize your time. So once you answer those, move on to maybe your third and fourth paragraph, answer those questions that pertain to those lines, then move on to maybe the fifth and sixth paragraph, answer those. Then at the end, once you've read the majority of that passage, then you can move on to your inferential questions when you've read the bulk of that passage. So batching or chunking is going to be really helpful for you if you happen to be a slow reader. You might also want to do the batching or the chunking method if you find yourself zoning out. And if you're that type of person who, once you read a full passage, you don't remember anything, the batching and chunking method keeps you focused in on a small portion at once and then helps you move on to each subsequent portion so you don't have to remember a bunch of stuff all at once. So if in general you have issues with the reading, this is a fantastic method that you should just try on the drills in this section.